from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, two major stories coming from the White House on two very different fronts, the war in Gaza and a pending government shutdown, with Democrats sending this message to President Trump.
Ultimately, he's the decision maker, and if he will accept some of the things we asked, which we think the American people are for, on health care and on rescissions, he can avoid a shutdown. But there are still large differences between us.
Congressional leaders convening at the White House for discussions with the president on the eve of a shutdown that could have a massive impact on Washington and across the country. The play-by-play live here in Washington when we go to Capitol Hill and speak with Republican Senator Ron Johnson on the economic and political impact of a potential government closure just moments from now.
And President Trump lays out his plan to end the war in Gaza.
This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way. But it will be done. We prefer the easy way, but it has to be done. All these goals must be achieved.
President Trump standing side by side with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, laying out a 20-point plan the leaders say would end the war in Gaza. We'll get into the details and what, if any, response from Hamas.
We begin this evening with the clock ticking down to a potential government shutdown. 1 day and a bit less than 7 hours to go before the federal government is shuttered, unless, of course, something is done on Capitol Hill. This afternoon, the president hosted congressional leaders from both sides of the aisle, including Democrats, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries.
Joining us now with the latest from Capitol Hill following President Trump's meeting with top congressional leaders is Bloomberg's Eric Wasson. Eric, it's good to see you, and thanks for being here. We just heard from the congressional leaders. They came out, spoke to reporters at the White House, and Chuck Schumer says that the president can avoid a shutdown, but, quote, differences remain. Just give us the stakes here. How likely is it that the government is going to shut down this week?
I would say it's more likely than not. Vice President Vance came out and says he thinks we're heading to a shutdown unless Democrats drop their demands. Republicans certainly feel they have the upper hand. The House has passed a no-strings-attached 7-week stopgap spending bill. It will keep the government open through November 21st. Democrats are blocking that. Democrats feel that they need to get this message out on health care. Rising costs or how they want to frame the midterm elections. There's very little incentive for them to suddenly drop those demands this early in the game. I think we're going to probably see a very short government shutdown. But even a short government shutdown will affect markets because the Bureau of Labor Statistics will be completely shut down and the October 3rd Friday jobs report will be delayed. Overall, markets tend to think shutdowns will get resolved, won't have a big impact on the economy. But White House Budget Director Russ Vought has talked about mass firings of the federal government non-essential workers if there is a shutdown. So the impact of a shutdown could be greater than we've seen in the past.
All right, Bloomberg's Eric Wasson. Eric, thank you so much for setting us up here. As we mentioned, that high-stakes last-minute meeting at the White House has concluded between the president and top congressional leaders. Here's what Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had to say immediately following their meet.
We laid out to the president some of the consequences of what's happening in health care. And by his face and by the way he looked, I think he heard about them for the first time. And so he seemed to, for the first time, understand the magnitude of this crisis. And we hope he'll talk to the Republican leaders and tell them we need bipartisan input on health care, on rescissions, into their bill.
All right, joining us now with his perspective live from Capitol Hill, a man in the middle of it all, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, a member of both the Senate Budget and Finance Committees. It's great to have you back, Senator, on Bloomberg TV and radio. You've been through this a lot of times, and we've talked about it a few times on the eve of a shutdown. Are you actively lobbying your Democratic colleagues to vote yes on this, or are you assuming that this debate is over?
Well, first of all, let me ask you and your listeners, aren't you sick and tired of this? Now, I'll be going to the Senate floor before we take a vote on the Eliminate Shutdowns Act. I'll ask the same question. I mean, this is so completely unnecessary. We generally know how these things end. Deals done to spend more money than the nation can afford. But the result of that is we've gone from $14 trillion in debt since I entered Congress in 2011 to $37 trillion. It certainly doesn't put pressure on passing appropriation bills. Here's a little factoid I had my staff look. I've been here 15 years. We should have passed 180 appropriation bills prior to the end of the fiscal year. We've passed a whopping 6. 3.3% success rate. That means a 96.7% failure rate. So obviously the shutdown showdown, this charade, doesn't create pressure to actually pass appropriation bills, but creates an awful lot of pressure to spend more than we can actually afford. So again, I hope Democrats come to their senses. This is completely unnecessary. We should stop playing partisan games with people's lives and with our economy. So again, the solution is eliminate Shutdowns Act. It just sets up rolling 4-day continuing appropriations for any account that hasn't been appropriated for. Appropriators still doesn't diminish their power. They can still do deals on things they agree on, negotiate on things they disagree on. It just gets rid of all the drama, all the angst, all the trauma for coming out from these shutdown showdowns.
All right, Senator, so you're floating a plan that would make 14-day CRs automatic. There is reporting that Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is floating a plan that potentially could keep the government open for 7 to 10 days, a very short CR. But if there are negotiations on making permanent those expiring Obamacare tax subsidies, is this something that you could get on board with if it means keeping the government open long enough so at least the discussions on the future of this program could be had?
Well, listen to what you just said. The temporary Obamacare COVID enhanced subsidies. Now, again, the reason people are paying such enormous premiums on the Obamacare exchanges is because of the Obamacare's faulty design. So what Democrats did during COVID is they increased the subsidies so millions didn't even have to chip in a dollar for their health care. As a result, you had unscrupulous agents and brokers sign people up using their name and the birth date. There's literally 6 million people at least who don't even know they have insurance companies. We've paid the insurance companies billions of dollars. Nobody used the policy. I mean, that's massive fraud, tens of billions of dollars worth of fraud. So increasing or continuing those Obamacare temporary subsidies, which Democrats could have done, they never voted for that, would simply perpetuate that massive fraud on the part of insurance companies. Again, whether they know it or not, the agents certainly do. Yeah. We can't extend that fraud.
Your Eliminate Shutdowns Act that you referenced, Senator, is something we talked about earlier with your House colleague, Dusty Johnson. He's got the House component on this. It would automatically trigger a 14-day continuing resolution in the event of a lapse in appropriations. And it's a clever idea. Explain to us, though, what would happen if you remove the prospect of a deadline? What's the incentive to come to the table and actually craft a proposal? I know you've told us it's not happening already, but what would make it start in this case?
Yeah, could it literally get any worse? 6 out of 180?
Maybe not.
But anyway, there's always going to be pressure to spend more money. You got defense hawk wanting to increase defense spending. You've got Democrats wanting to ramp up and some Republicans domestic spending. So there's always going to be pressure. If we just hold spending flat, there'd probably be coalitions put together to increase spending and come to some sort of deal. We passed a minibus here in the Senate for Veterans Administration, military construction. So there are areas of agreement. Focus on those. The areas of disagreement, work out some compromises. But again, it really couldn't be any worse than it is right now.
And part of what's adding to the pressure of these negotiations is that we saw this OMB memo released last week where the White House was directing using the threat of permanent layoffs as a negotiating tactic here. Do you think that's the right way to get leverage in these conversations? Is that something that you would support?
Well, back in 1930, the federal government spent 3.1% of our economy. This year, we'll spend over 23%. So government has grown completely out of control. We're $37 trillion in debt. From my standpoint, the solution is reduce the size, scope, and cost of federal government. Part of that is letting government employees get jobs in the private sector. You know, right now in Wisconsin, we can't find enough workers, so there are plenty of jobs in the private sector for government employees. That's what happens in the private sector. When you have layoffs, people have to get another job. Federal government employees shouldn't be immune from that process either.
Interesting. It's an interesting world that we're in here, Senator, as we talk about this, remembering that this is essentially a Joe Biden budget that we're talking about, one that Republicans didn't want when it was first around and Democrats were beating the drum. We've come all the way around here for Republicans voting for this and Democrats saying, hell no, not without a negotiation. Is this why everyone loves Washington?
That's why everybody hates Washington, and I include myself in that group. So I want to reduce Washington and its influence over our lives, and certainly the amount of money it spends. Again, I'm not satisfied with these spending levels. I want to do a line-by-line, program-by-program review of the federal government and start reducing it back to a reasonable pre-pandemic level. We went from $4.4 trillion of spending in 2019 up to over $7 trillion today. That's a 58% increase while population is growing less than 3%. There's no justification for that, but unfortunately, people like me are vastly outnumbered. We need the public understanding and connecting the dots. The reason they can't afford things is because this massive deficit spending, being undertaken by a massive federal government. So, again, the solution is reduce the size and scope of government.
And Senator, we know that there's going to be this vote tomorrow night. It's scheduled already, but then the Senate's supposed to be out of session Thursday and Friday. Have you gotten any indications from leadership that you're going to have to change plans and remain in town to keep these negotiations going, ultimately to try to get the government reopened if we do shut down?
Listen, this is all part of the dysfunction. You can never plan and schedule anything in the United States Senate or in the House for that matter. Again, we could eliminate that. We could bring certainty to our schedules. But again, the main reason is we need to stop playing partisan games with people's lives. This hurts our economy. It's not good. Shutdowns are bad. And we can eliminate them for all time. A very simple bill. Automatic rolling 14-day continuing appropriations, what we call them. And again, then appropriators can get back to work. It doesn't diminish their authority whatsoever. It just takes all the drama, all the angst out of this process.
Senator, I want to ask you something about just a slightly different front, based on your seat on the Homeland Security Committee. The president is sending National Guard troops to another city. In this case, it's Portland, where he says they've been authorized to use full force. Based on what we saw here in Washington, what we saw in L.A., do you support that move, and would you also invite troops like this to Milwaukee?
First of all, I support law enforcement, and I certainly support the president sending law enforcement or federal troops in some way, shape, or form to protect federal law enforcement officers and federal property. It's a totally appropriate thing to do when you have mayors and governors of some of these blue states that want to defund police and apparently don't care about their citizenry. So I appreciate President Trump is showing leadership here and doing what he can to keep American citizens safe. Democrats won't do that.
And Senator, in the final minute we have with you, I want to hit one more topic, and that's tariffs, since we've seen a flurry of announcements from President Trump over the past few days. And according to the USTR, your state, Wisconsin, exported $27.5 billion of goods into the world in 2024. Now, we heard from Senate Majority Leader John Thune in an interview over the weekend saying that the administration is already considering what potential bailouts for farmers would look like. You represent, of course, the top agriculture producing state. I'm wondering if you've had any discussions on what those potential solutions would look like.
Well, I know there was some bailouts the last time, and I don't think Wisconsin farmers necessarily participated in that in an utterly fair way. Listen, I'm pretty much an unabashed free trader, but it's got to be fair trade. I am very sympathetic with what President Trump is trying to do, to reset our relationship with a lot of these trading partners that have abused the privilege of access to American markets. The sooner we can bring these trade negotiations to an end, return stability and certainty to the marketplace, the better for all Americans, particularly in Wisconsin.
So in that case, should our listeners and viewers prepare for another farm bailout, Senator?
That'll be up to the administration. Again, from my standpoint, I'd rather get these trade negotiations concluded so we've got some stability and certainty in the market.
All right, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, we thank you so much for your time and for joining us here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Coming up, we'll continue our conversation on the looming government funding deadline, whether or not it's going to happen, with Marc Short. He's the former chief of staff to former Vice President Mike Pence. That's up ahead. But first, we'll talk about President Trump's meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu today at the White House and its impact on the potential ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. We'll discuss all of that and more with Evelyn Farkas of the McCain Institute next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
I also want to thank Prime Minister Netanyahu for agreeing to the plan. If accepted by Hamas, this proposal calls for the release of all remaining hostages immediately, but in no case more than 72 hours.
I believe that today we're taking a critical step towards both ending the war in Gaza and setting the stage for dramatically advancing peace in the Middle East.
This is Bounce Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Joe Matthew. I'm Tyler Kendall. And that was President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier today announcing a 20-point plan to end the war in Gaza. Netanyahu saying, quote, "This can be done the easy way or the hard way, but it will be done." Netanyahu has to now sell the plan to the Israeli parliament, but some key sticking points in the proposal could face some strong pushback. For more analysis on today's meeting, we turn now to Evelyn Farkas, Executive Director of Arizona State University's McCain Institute. She's also the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia and Ukraine under the Obama administration. Evelyn, it's good to see you, and thanks so much for joining Bloomberg. One of the big questions here is whether Hamas will accept this deal. What are you watching for as we wait for their response?
I think, obviously, to see what Hamas says and whether we get any signals from the Gulf countries or from Egypt about likely resistance. But, you know, at the end of the day, this agreement is the kind of agreement, Tyler, that, you know, everybody knew this is the kind of agreement we want in the end. So if the Israelis agree, then the threat is real that if Hamas says no, you know, we're going to let the Israeli far right continue, frankly, their policy, which is what looks like obliterating, you know, really decimating Gaza in the interest of weeding out every last Hamas fighter.
At the same time, Evelyn, I'm trying to find the news besides a proposal that I realize you seem to like the looks of here, but we've heard Donald Trump and we heard former President Joe Biden both roll out multi-point peace plans that were said to be a deal. Is anything different this time than the last six-point plan, I think it was, we heard from the administration?
I mean, this one, Joe, has definite President Trump fingerprints all over it. So, you know, there's a oversight mechanism which they call some kind of peace council, which he might chair. Then there's an economic development plan, which they also made reference to his principles and his ideas. So it's different in that respect. And there's definitely reference to creating cities along the lines of other cities that have been created in the region. So that made me think of the Saudis, because, of course, they have created modern cities that would be the envy of the people of Gaza, the Palestinian people. So there are some differences here, but yes, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still going to be incredibly difficult. It's going to be difficult, as Tyler indicated, to get Hamas to sign. But frankly, even though President Trump said that he got the Prime Minister Netanyahu, that he got him to agree to this agreement, Israel hasn't signed. He still has to get it through the Knesset, through his legislature.
Well, Evelyn, you indicated this earlier, that part of this 20-point plan does have to do with the future governance of Gaza. I would love your expertise on this. What does a viable governance structure look like that would be reliable and sustainable for peace in the area?
Well, this is the tricky part. And this is where, you know, Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf states, they need to work really closely with the Palestinian leadership. The Palestinian leadership, frankly, is not very popular among the Palestinian people. And those leaders who are popular, there's one leader who's in jail who is popular. If he gets released, perhaps he could start a new kind of Palestinian political party or movement. You know, basically, they need people who can govern and have legitimacy in the eyes of the Palestinian people. And they need to know how to govern effectively. And then there's the security issue. We have a lot of experience with building security forces, including with Palestinians. The United States was involved in this when I worked for the U.S. European Command. Israel was under our region, and I went and visited where the U.S. was training Palestinian security forces. We've done it before, and we've done it also in Egypt and Jordan. So those are two neighboring countries that also have expertise. But that will be the critical thing, because you need to get the Israelis to leave Gaza, then bring in an interim security force, also a big question mark exactly what that will look like. But presumably those will be forces from the region, those countries that I just mentioned. And then the last phase is, ultimately the Palestinian security forces control Gaza.
Evelyn, we heard the president today say that part of this deal will include the immediate release of hostages, or at least no longer than 72 hours after it is presumably signed or ratified, I guess, is when the clock would start ticking on this. Do we know that Hamas knows where all of the hostages are?
Well, Joe, that's a good question. Maybe they don't, and then we'll have to figure out whether it's credible if they come and they say they don't. And frankly, the Israelis have the right not just to the living hostages, but the remains of the deceased hostages who have been held as well. And that may be a harder, part of the equation in terms of getting those remains. But we need to work as closely as we can, obviously, to make sure that there is closure for those families. And I want to also make sure that we understand that this is a deal about Gaza. It's still not a deal about Palestine. It's still not, the agreement at the very end talks about, a two-state solution and the future Palestinian state. In the Israeli political mindset, the current prime minister and his government, they think that's very far off. They don't think that there's a credible and trustworthy Palestinian counterpart for them. And that will be another sticking point, but we have to get past this particular agreement. So I think they were wise not to try to deal with that in this agreement.
And Evelyn, in the final minute that we have you here, you've been talking a lot about how regional partners have played into all of the negotiations and all these important issues we're outlining. We heard from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today in a post on X saying that he made a commitment to President Trump that Israel has no plans to violate Qatar's sovereignty again after airstrikes earlier this month. Just very quickly, how pivotal a player will Qatar be here in implementing this deal going forward?
Well, they're absolutely pivotal because, Tyler, that's where the Hamas leadership is in exile. And presumably any Hamas leadership that surrenders, gives up their weapons, according to this agreement, they have the right to free passage out of Gaza, out of Israel. So that means that some other state has to take them. I'm guessing it would be Qatar. And so they are critical in this. They are critical in pressuring Hamas, first and foremost, to accept the agreement, and then giving Hamas a guarantee that if they surrender, they will be safe in Qatar. And that's, of course, why, more than anything else, the Israeli government needed to tell the Qataris and needed to make it sure that all of these fighters understood that they wouldn't strike again in Qatar.
Evelyn, it's great to have you back as always. Evelyn Farkas, Executive Director of Arizona State University's McCain Institute. We thank you. Coming up with the government funding deadline looming over Washington now, we'll take a look at some of the cuts and mass firings that have been predicted if the shutdown takes effect. Mark Short will join us, Chief of Staff to former President Mike Pence. He's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Life in industrial America isn't great. I mean, top line is not growing, and one of the questions that we don't know is the impact of tariff and what will happen in corporate America in terms of how they're going to deal with either passing on prices or diminishing margin and so on and so forth. And we don't know that, and so there's a whole leg of the equation that we haven't really seen.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Tyler Kendall. And that was the PIMCO CEO Manny Roman this morning on Surveillance, discussing how tariff uncertainty is impacting the U.S. equity market. with President Trump today threatening fresh tariffs related to furniture and movies. Let's take a look at how the markets responded with power moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Romaine.
Hey, Tyler. And we talk about modest moves in the market today, modest gains, but there was a bit of trepidation, and it was directly tied to concerns about the government shutdown, but not necessarily for the reasons that you would think. It's not so much that the market is concerned about the economic damage that a government shutdown would do. It's more about the idea that they won't actually know how well the economy is doing, because if the government does shut down, we will not see some key economic data. Remember, much of the rally that we've had over the past few weeks and months, for that matter, is basically the market's read on where inflation is, where the consumer is, and what the reaction function by the Fed might be. That's why you saw a bit of buying today in the bond market that actually pushed yields around because of some concerns here about whether there would indeed be a safe haven to hide. The dollar did drop on the day and gold did rise. Remember, we have a jobs report scheduled for this Friday, October 3rd. But even beyond that, you have to look to a CPI report on October 15th, a retail sales report on October 16th, all ahead of the Fed's next meeting at the end of October on the 29th. And any potential disruption in a read on that economic data could have significant consequences, guys, for what the market does and how it reacts to a government shutdown.
This day also featured the biggest leveraged buyout ever.
Oh, yeah.
Romaine, which is saying something. EA, look at that, Electronic Arts.
Yeah.
I'm curious, though, why didn't it go to $200 a share where the deal was?
Yeah, I mean, this has been talked about for quite some time. Of course, I know you're probably a big Madden guy, Joe, but this gets to this idea of a company that had been struggling and a company that had been looking for a lifeline. And based on what we know now, it does look like a consortium, partly led by Jared Kushner, partly led by the Saudis, are going to buy out this company, a take private, if you will, at roughly $210 a share, a valuation of $50 billion, which is astonishing given some of the big take privates that we've had over the years, including TXU. Of course, Twitter, which was a $44 billion deal and probably one of the most famed take privates ever, the RJR deal many decades ago, which was about $31 billion. This does look like it could be a done deal at this point, Joe. And it gets to this idea here that, quite frankly, there are just a lot of companies out there that just can't really hack it in the public markets. And maybe they will find strength in being private, not having the scrutiny on a quarterly basis of investors looking over their shoulders.
Fascinating. That's quite a chart behind you. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick. Great to have you as always, Romaine. And as Washington braces for the impact of a potential government shutdown, White House has threatened to conduct mass firings of federal employees, as we've told you, if the government shuts down tomorrow night. The memo that was released from Russ Vought detailing that a shutdown would trigger widespread dismissals of employees in government programs that do not align with Trump's priorities. Those firings and a shutdown would come on the same day about 100,000 federal workers resign in the largest mass resignation in American history, all part of the latest wave in the administration's deferred resignation program initiated at the start of President Trump's second term, if you remember the Doge. Joining us now for a look at what that might look like in practice and just what's going to happen the next couple of days. In our Washington bureau, Marc Short, the former chief of staff for Vice President Mike Pence, Republican strategist, and, of course, legislative affairs director in the first Trump administration. So he brings a view from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. It's great to see you, Marc.
Thanks for having me
Welcome.
back.
We have lots of questions, but I just need to start with your gut check here. We're in bizarro world. Republicans want Democrats to vote for a Biden budget. The government might shut down over this tomorrow. Do you think it will?
I think it will. There's a lot of moving parts still. But as you said, it's ironic that for a lot of reasons. One is it's traditionally been Republicans that have pushed for shutdowns to say we need to contain spending, we need to cut it back. This time it's Democrats pushing for a shutdown. Of course, they are asking for $1 trillion and more spending. It's for different reasons. But they've usually been reluctant to push for a shutdown because in many cases federal employees are part of their base. And yet now they're the ones pushing for this. But another irony is that it was just a couple years ago that House Republicans dethroned Kevin McCarthy for exactly this vote.
Incredible.
That now every single Republican except one or two voted to support a continuing resolution at Biden spending levels. That was a complaint, is that we can't keep spending at Biden spending levels. We have to cut spending. And now everybody on the Republican side is in favor of it.
Well, take us inside of the room here. As we said, you were the legislative affairs director under the first Trump administration, and I'm pretty struck by what feels like almost different priorities or perhaps strategies from Democratic leadership. You had Hakeem Jeffries saying that he wants to see pen to paper. There has to be legislative text. But now there's reports that perhaps Chuck Schumer could be in favor of a short-term stopgap, that he would get on board with a framework agreement. Who has more leverage in this situation? Is that something perhaps that the Trump administration would go for?
Well, I think relative to Jeffrey, Schumer has a lot more leverage because right now, the way the House and Senate work, you're going to need Democrat votes on this. I think, though, that in many cases, I think Republicans have been pushing the shutdowns because they're trying to placate the base of supporters who want to see opposition and push. And traditionally, you would say, look, whichever party's in control is going to get blamed for this. I don't think that's the case right now. The Republicans have already passed a continuing resolution to keep the government open. It's pretty clear that Democrats are the one pushing for this. And I don't know if there's really an out for them because basically they're just trying to say we're showing that we're going to fight Trump. Yeah. Well, where does that end?
Well, it also begs the question of what happens if we do close down. Does it ever reopen? And something I talked to Dusty Johnson about earlier today. The Republican congressman is the other side of the Eliminate Shutdowns Act that we talked about with Ron Johnson. This would automatically trigger a 14-day CR in the event of a shutdown. He spoke to this idea of mass layoffs, of the OMB director having his way with the shape of government here in Washington in the midst of a shutdown. Here's what Johnson said.
If they use that scalpel in a way that seems targeted and inappropriate, I think it can help the messaging. If they go in and they do things that are a little bit more nuclear, I think that could make Republicans seem not quite so reasonable. That could shift the political landscape. So I would just say I expect the administration to do the right thing in cutting government during the shutdown. I don't think it's just a threat. I think Russ' vote is absolutely serious.
Do you agree with that as a serious threat in this case? Not just a threat, I should say. Will they do what the Doge could not do if it shuts down?
Well, look, I think Russ has always been a fiscal hawk, and I think Russ would essentially want this. But the question is, will Trump allow him to? There are many times in the first administration when OMB came forward with suggested spending cuts, the president refused. I don't think the president's as much of a fiscal hawk as Russ is. And so I think Russ is sincere in that. The question is, will the president allow that to go through, or is it more of a negotiating tactic right now?
Right, because what about the optics here? We had our analysts at Bloomberg Economics say that if furloughs go into effect just from the government shutting down, it could raise the unemployment rate to 4.7%. How difficult is that going to be for the administration to navigate, as we're already dealing with a fragile labor market? And we know that this White House wants to campaign on its economic policies.
Well, I think it is a huge risk to the administration on the employment side, Tyler. I think that this trade agenda is really having a damaging impact on jobs. But as you said, tomorrow will be roughly 100,000 federal employees who are now off the labor search. So that's going to come into the unemployment numbers, too, even before additional potential furloughs. So, yeah, I think that should be a big concern for the administration, just the numbers there.
If we do shut down, Mark, will rescissions go down as the sin that caused this?
Oh, I don't think so.
No?
I don't think this is really about policy. I think this is all politics right now. I think that the Democrat...
There's a political side to that, right, if we're talking about trust?
Well, I think the trust has been undermined on both sides for a while now. I do think that for the administration, to your question, Tyler, a question would be, if the blame is really going to be on Democrats, do you want to insert yourself into this equation right now and say, no, I want some of this too, which I think the OMB memo does. And so if they took that position, it could muddy the waters for a lot of voters to say who's really more responsible for this. I think right now, most people believe Democrats are pushing this because, again, Republicans have passed legislation to keep the government open.
I know you said this is more about politics, but on policy, I am wondering what your assessment is here of the future of these Obamacare premium subsidies. Is this something that could be extended? Where do you see this particular point playing out, as we know that Democrats at least are trying to make the messaging here really about health care?
I think when Democrats passed Obamacare, they were smart in pushing for these subsidies because they knew that it would raise the price of health care. And the only way to continue to support it is the government subsidize it. I wish Republicans stayed principled in their opposition to government-run health care. But, Tyler, I think Republicans will pass the subsidy extension at the end of the year. I think there's enough of them that want this. They don't want to be responsible for saying health care premiums increase. So I think it's going to happen.
That, right? Is that the same bill? I mean, it's already happening, apparently. He says that I'm part of the group working on the wording to make sure we do it right. It would hurt my state of Alabama. He's not alone.
You're exactly right that it's not just like these are moderate Republicans.
Yeah.
It's frankly Tommy Tuberville. Now, of course,
Democrats know this.
Well, in many cases, it's Republican governors who see much of that Obamacare expense. So as he's looking to run for governor of Alabama, he wants to get out in front on that. But that's exactly the political issue that I fear Republicans are going to say we need to continue these subsidies. I just think the question, Tyler, is I think for Republicans, I think this is an end-of-year battle. We've already passed the clean CR. Let's not muddy the water on the CR right now.
But at that point, how far do we then kick the can down the road again? Are we just going to be in this endless cycle at this point?
Yes. I mean, I think that's always been the challenge that conservatives argued is once you begin subsidizing it, it's a lot harder to cut those subsidies off. And I think we're well down that road now.
All right, Marc Short, we are lucky to have you on this important day. Marc Short, former Chief of Staff for Vice President Mike Pence and Republican strategist, we thank you so much. Now, coming up, we'll continue this conversation on the impending shutdown deadline with our political panel. And President Trump has ordered the military to be deployed to Portland, Oregon over anti-ICE protests. We'll bring you the details next. Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Tyler Kendall. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We'll turn back to the impending funding deadline here, the countdown to the shutdown with our political panel in just a moment. First, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. On Saturday, President Trump announced that he's ordered the military to be deployed in Portland, Oregon, making it the fourth U.S. city he has sent the National Guard to quell anti-ICE protests, assist in immigration authorities, and clean up local crime. Oregon's Governor Tina Kotek says that she made it clear to the president this move was unnecessary, saying, quote, there is no insurrection. There's no threat to national security. There's no need or legal justification for military troops in our major city, unquote. That condemnation coming shortly before Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker convened a news conference today, denouncing the president's plan to send federal agents to Chicago.
And President Trump posted on Truth Social earlier today, reiterating his plan for a 100% tariff on movies. He first proposed the plan in May. It's unclear which federal authority the president would invoke, as the Motion Picture Association says the U.S. sells more movies overseas than it imports. Movies are considered digital services, and legal experts say applying any tax on foreign content would violate binding World Trade Organization agreements.
Charlie Javis was sentenced to 85 months, 7 years behind bars for defrauding J.P. Morgan Chase in its $175 million acquisition of her student finance startup, Frank. A U.S. district judge handing down the sentence earlier today in a Manhattan federal court. Prosecutors had asked Javis be given a 12-year sentence, but the judge seemed to take into account testimony concerning the 33-year-old's good character. A New York jury convicted Javis in March, finding she had misled the nation's biggest bank into believing her site had more than 4.2 million users when it had fewer than 300,000.
And embattled New York City Mayor Eric Adams ends his re-election bid. Weeks after battling away reports he was ending his run, Adams bowed out this weekend. Adams posted this video announcing the end of his campaign.
Major change is welcome and necessary, but beware of those who claim the answer to destroy the very system we built together over generations. That is not change, that is chaos. Instead, I urge New Yorkers to choose leaders not by what they promise, but by what they have delivered.
The latest Fox News poll on the New York City election had Adams at just 7%. Compare that to Zohran Mamdani's 47% and former Governor Andrew Cuomo's 29%. President Trump took to social media and fired off a message following the campaign developments, threatening to withhold federal funding from New York City if Mamdani is elected.
Joining us now with the reaction to this story and more today, our political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributor Rick Davis, our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital, alongside our Democratic analyst Jeanne Zaino, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, both Bloomberg Politics contributors. Great to see you both. Jeanne, I'll start with you in New York because that's where it went down. Does Eric Adams, I believe all of 8% in the latest poll in the New York mayoral race from Suffolk University, actually make a dent by leaving?
You know, not much of a dent, not enough for Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo has been in maybe the mid-20s, depending. We've got Curtis Lewa in the mid-teens. So even if Andrew Cuomo inherits all of Adams' 7-8%, it's not going to be enough to close the gap with Mamdani. Now, things could change if Curtis Lewa left the race, potentially, although we have no indication that that is going to happen. So it is a win, a small win for Andrew Cuomo, but it's not enough to close the gap, at least at this point, because Mamdani has been double-digit leads ahead of all of the rest of the pack here.
Well, Rick, we know that President Trump has weighed in on this race. He repeatedly urged Adams to drop out. I'm wondering what your assessment is now that we've had this narrow downfield.
Well, it's probably too little too late. Number one, he waited till, I think, really the last minute. His name's still going to appear on the ballot. He didn't really accomplish that. And I must admit, I've negotiated a few withdrawals and endorsements. That was the weakest withdrawal endorsement I've ever seen. He didn't even endorse anybody.
Wow.
I mean, when you have an opportunity like this, you say, I want this person to be the next mayor of New York City. I mean, what happened to the great Pauls of New York, the David Dinkins, the Rudy Giuliani's? These guys really knew politics. This is like amateur night, sitting on the stairs and saying, I'm out of politics for the rest of my life.
Series carrying his mom's picture as he did, I guess, when he first announced, but he's walking down sitting on the bottom of a staircase with Frank Sinatra playing to say farewell. Is that the way you do this?
It's unexplainable. Okay. That's my point. I mean, New York has lost its political mojo, and now they're looking like they're going to elect a socialist. I mean, come on, New York, wake up! What happened to you?
Well, Jeanne, I do hear you laughing there in the background, so we'll give you a chance to weigh on this moment as well.
Tyler, I was just thinking, you can't go wrong with Frank Sinatra. So I agree with Rick to a point, but he did not do wrong with Frank Sinatra. Chairman of the board, you can't go wrong.
Okay, well, at least we carved that out. I want to ask you both about what's happening today in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill, and just a short time ago at the White House. I don't know if we can hear from J.D. Vance, who spoke in the driveway following his meeting with Democratic leaders, Republican leaders on Capitol Hill. But, Rick, it looks like we do not have a deal in place. We do have J.D. Vance. Interesting to hear the vice president lead the charge on this messaging as well. This took place just a short time ago outside the West Wing.
We have disagreements about tax policy, but you don't shut that government down. We have disagreements about health care policy, but you don't shut the government down. You don't use your policy disagreements as leverage to not pay our troops, to not have essential services of government actually function. You don't say the fact that you disagree about a particular tax provision is an excuse for shutting down the people's government and all the essential services that come along with it.
So we're going to do this all over again?
Yeah.
Are we shutting down?
Less than 30 hours,
yeah.
And I think that's where we're headed. And look, I mean, J.D. Vance, former senator, he's been a point person on a lot of legislative action so far in this administration. He's had to break a few ties in the Senate already. He's really the guy to watch on this, because at the end of the day, unless the president and J.D. Vance agree to a deal, there's no such thing as negotiating with the Senate. Schumer had his shot today. Claimed that he made some progress with Trump about this idea that ACA subsidies would expire and that would hurt millions of people. Claimed that Donald Trump didn't seem to have known that. Look, he watches a lot of news. I'd be surprised by that. So at the end of the day, I think the Democrats have built a trap, and they have caught themselves in it. This idea that somehow Republicans are going to abandon a bill that is a clean CR. There's really it's a no-brainer in legislative speak, right? I mean, like, everybody should be for this. Democrats voted for it last time. Now Republicans have voted for it this time. I mean, you never have that in Washington. And the fact that you're holding it up for trillions of dollars in new spending and cuts, that's what you do in an appropriations fight, not in a stopgap spending bill. Yeah.
Well, Jeanne, who do you think will also see it this way? Rick just outlined the Republicans to watch. I'm wondering which Democrats you're watching for, because as you well know, at least 7 have to get on board in order for Republicans to pass this bill. Really likely 8, since we know that Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky has already said that he's probably not going to vote for this either.
Yeah, I think the senators to watch at this point on the Democratic side would be the senators from Virginia and Maryland. If we go into a shutdown, which seems likely, and we will see the furlough, and if the threat to engage in firing, proceeds, and we don't know if that is going to be the case because that was the memo the White House put out the other day. You wonder if Democrats will be incentivized, particularly from those states with a lot of public employees, to move. We don't see a sign of that yet, but I think those are the ones to watch. And I would just say we are now in a messaging war, and listening to J.D. Vance, we have to fact check some of what the vice president is saying here. He is saying repeatedly that Democrats want to shut down the government in order to give health care to illegal immigrants, and that is certainly not the case. So I think we're in a messaging war. We're going to have to do a lot of fact-checking on both sides, but the vice president to go out and say that is the height of irresponsibility. I am not a fan of the Democrats doing this. I think it is the wrong strategy, but I think it is, beyond the pale for the vice president to say something that is patently untrue and nothing any Democrat that I've heard has ever suggested.
We've heard that from a number of Republicans, actually, over the past couple of days here. Rick, there's a question about whether Tommy Tuberville might save Obamacare subsidies for Democrats here. He is apparently working on a piece of legislation, it's unclear who's leading it, to extend Obamacare subsidies following this CR. It would happen in time for expiration at the end of the year. 12 House Republicans have apparently joined with 7 Democrats on a bill that would do the same. Are they working on a rescue package right now?
Yeah, I honestly believe that Republicans are smart enough to take a look at this and fix it, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's an outright extension.
Sure.
It could be some cutting like they did with Medicaid.
Yeah.
And so, to be determined. But there's nothing in it for Republicans in the majority to say that we're just going to let this expire and have this many people affected by it. I mean, in that regard, Schumer was correct in talking to Donald Trump. But Republicans have always held out the expectation that they could repair this after we get the rest of the budget moving for this extension.
Jeanne, final 30 seconds here. Democrats are leaning into health care. How much is this about the policy versus trying to avoid the backlash that we saw in March when ultimately a deal wasn't made on changes?
Yeah, I think so much of this is about what you said, Tyler, what happened in March. The Democrats are in a no-win situation. Their base is furious. They were furious in March. And there would be a mutiny amongst the Democratic base if the leadership did not hold out against Donald Trump. They are angry, not just about health care, but everything the Trump administration is doing. And they want to see a fight. And it looks like they're going to get one.
All right, our political panel tonight, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino. We thank you both, as always. And to learn more about all these stories you heard, make sure to check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll see you back here tomorrow. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.